You know, if you'd asked me 10 years ago what happens when we die, I would have given you a very clear answer. Nothing. We shut off. That's it. I was a scientist, a practical, rational, data-driven person. I didn't believe in heaven, or hell, or reincarnation, or energy, or any of that stuff people talk about when they want to feel better about the unknown. I thought it was all just human stories. Wishful thinking. I mean, I grew up Catholic, strict Catholic. But by the time I hit my late teens, I had already walked away from all of it. The scandals in the church, the hypocrisy, the guilt, none of it made sense. And besides, science gave me answers. Solid ones, observable, repeatable. I liked that. So when I say I wasn't the kind of person to believe in near-death experiences, I really mean it. But then something happened that changed everything. I got hit by a car while riding my bike. A normal afternoon turned into the most terrifying, surreal moment of my life. And what I experienced during the surgery that followed, it wasn't a dream. It wasn't some painkiller-induced hallucination. It was something else, something I still don't fully understand. I didn't just think I died. I know I did. And what I saw, what I felt, it shook me to my core. It broke down everything I thought I knew about life and rebuilt something new in its place. I'm not telling you this to convince you of anything. I just want to share what happened. Because once you've been somewhere else, somewhere beyond this world, you can't ever go back to being the same. I remember the day everything changed like it happened yesterday. I was living in Eugene, Oregon at the time, quiet town, wrapped in trees and low-rolling hills. I had just turned 46 and was in the middle of a life chapter that felt half-finished. My name's Claire Mendel. I'd spent most of my adult life working in science. Hard, logical, grounded stuff. I had a degree in geophysics, worked for years with the Department of Energy, mostly writing and editing dense technical reports no one but specialists read. I was good at it. Writing came naturally, and most of the scientists I worked with couldn't string 3 clear sentences together. But behind all of that logic and structure, I was falling apart. My marriage had ended. I was sitting in this empty rental house, halfway between the life I thought I wanted and the life I had. Every day felt gray, flat, like I was waiting for a decision to be made for me, so I started looking for jobs. I figured a fresh start would help. Maybe Denver, maybe the Pacific Northwest, somewhere else. I just needed movement. It was the week between Christmas and New Year's. I had a few days off and decided to run a couple of errands by bike, drop off a book at the library, swing by the store, and take a short trail ride afterward. Simple. Clean air. Nothing intense. I remember pedaling through a quiet part of town, approaching a traffic circle near the highway. There was a bike lane, until there wasn't. It just disappeared. The road narrowed, and I slowed way down, inching forward cautiously. To my right, a line of vehicles was coming off the highway, merging into the circle. One of them, a silver SUV, was approaching fast. I made eye contact with the driver. At least, I thought I did. She was slowing, or so I assumed. She didn't stop. Instead, she sped up. I was right in front of her now. My instincts kicked in. I put my hand out to signal, then everything just disappeared. Next thing I know, I'm on the hood of her SUV, staring straight through her windshield. And she's texting. Not braking, not reacting. Just scrolling her phone. I started pounding on the glass, yelling, trying to make her see me, but she didn't look up. She kept driving. I couldn't hold on. The hood was slick, too slick. I slid down, grabbing for anything. Nothing caught. And then came the pavement. I heard my helmet crack. Then everything went black. When I came to, I realized she had run over me. Literally driven over my body. Somehow, my backpack got snagged under the car. An instinct, or some force I still don't understand, made me reach up and grab the axle with my right hand. I don't remember deciding to do that. I just did it. She dragged me nearly 60 feet before someone behind her, a stranger in a pickup, saw what was happening. He sped around the circle the wrong way and stopped in front of her. Only then did she slam on the brakes. I owe my life to that man. I don't know his name, but without him, I'm not sure I'd be here. When the car finally stopped, I started trying to crawl out from under it. My shoulders made it out first. Then a woman appeared, said she was a nurse. She knelt beside me and told me not to move. I didn't understand the urgency. I told her I was fine. I'd just get up and go home. She looked me in the eyes and said, "You were just in a major accident. Stay still." Then the pain hit. When the paramedics arrived, one of them touched the side of my neck, and I screamed, like full-body, primal scream. It felt like lightning ripping down my spine. That's when I knew. This wasn't just a fall. They rushed me to the trauma center. Diagnosis? Head trauma. Cracked collarbone. 5 ribs, each broken in multiple places. Collapsed lung. But the worst part was my back and neck. The doctor explained it like this. Every spinous process in your back is fractured. Major vertebral damage in your cervical and lumbar spine. In layman's terms, my back was a jigsaw puzzle. The surgeon said he could fix it. Titanium rods, screws, basically rebuild the structure. Surgery was scheduled for 3 days later, that Monday. But leading up to it, I was terrified. Not just nervous. I mean, soul-level panic. Death had always been my greatest fear. I didn't talk about it, but it haunted me. It's what made me cling to logic, to science, to data. It made me feel safe. And now here I was, on a gurney, about to be cut open, and something in me whispered, "You're not coming back." They wheeled me into the operating room. The anesthesiologist leaned in, said something comforting, and then administered the medication. My vision blurred, and I started drifting. Normally, with surgery, there's just nothingness, gray static, then the recovery room. But not this time. This time, I woke up somewhere else. I opened my eyes, but it wasn't the hospital. At least, not the kind of hospital I knew. There were no lights, no beeping machines, no cold metal. I was lying in a meadow. Honestly, it looked like something from a dream. Low grasses danced around me in the breeze, dotted with little purple and white flowers. The air smelled like clean rain and something I couldn't name, something ancient. I was on a hillside, looking out over wave after wave of rolling mountain ranges, and it felt real. Too real. My first thought? Okay, hallucination. This is the anesthesia. But right after that thought came a second one. I feel more awake now than I ever did in my normal life. More aware, more me. That alone shook me. Then came the warmth. It wasn't sun. It wasn't physical heat exactly. It was like standing in front of a fire, but from the inside. It moved through me, around me. Not just warmth, but presence. And then, just like that, it spoke. Not with words out loud, but with thoughts in my mind, yet somehow coming from all directions at once. It said, "You're home. You're part of me. You're part of us. Welcome back." And when I heard that, "Welcome back," I just broke. Not from fear, not from confusion, but from memory. Because in that instant, it all rushed back to me. I knew this place. I recognized it, even though I couldn't say where or when I'd been here before. It was like someone turned on a light in the back of my mind, and everything that had been hidden was suddenly right there. The life I lived on Earth? It felt so small, so far away. Almost like a dream I'd had a long time ago and forgotten about. That life, the one with bills and breakups and jobs and fears, it was just an illusion, a temporary simulation. This was the real place. And I remembered it. I didn't see people, not in the way we think of people. But there was someone. A presence began to form through the mist. She didn't have a clear face. She was soft around the edges, more energy than form. I couldn't say if she was human, but I felt no fear, only calm. She radiated peace like gravity, pulling me into stillness just by being near me. She said, again, not with lips, but with something deeper. It's time to learn what you need to learn so you can go back. And I froze. Back? I remember saying, half laughing, "Oh no, 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 I'm not going back. Have you seen what it's like down there?" She was gentle but firm. "You already agreed to return." I was stunned. Agreed when? I don't remember agreeing to anything. She smiled, not with her mouth, but with something in the air, like the wind itself was smiling. "You made that decision before you were born." Then she showed me. A screen of sorts appeared in front of me, though there were no walls, no projector, no pixels. Just air that shimmered into images. I watched myself, before I was born, planning this life, choosing challenges, mapping out major moments. Not every detail, but key turning points. The people I'd meet, the ones who would hurt me, the ones I'd love. I saw myself agreeing to come here, to Earth, to this near-life experience, as she called it. And behind me? Nothing. Just fog. Pure, gray emptiness. But in front of me, fields, forests, rivers of color and sound and feeling. She told me, "This place you're in now, it's not the final reality. It's a holding space, a learning zone, designed to feel familiar and safe so that you can understand what you need to understand." And then the lessons began. She didn't lecture me. She guided me, gently, like a parent walking beside a child taking their first steps. And what she taught me first was this: everything is energy. What we see, what we touch, it's just the visible part. The real structure of life isn't physical. It's energetic. It's spiritual. What we think is solid is just a shadow of a deeper blueprint. And in that moment, I knew it was true. I didn't believe it in theory. I felt it. It was like someone gave me new eyes, and I was finally seeing the hidden architecture of the universe. Time? It didn't work the same way here. While my physical body was on the operating table for maybe 2 minutes, just long enough for my heart to stop, I spent what felt like months in this place. Weeks of learning, of remembering, of exploring something beyond space and time. Then she brought me somewhere new. I was standing in a vast, open space, a kind of stone courtyard with no roof. And around me, floating in the air, was a map of my life. It looked almost nautical, like an old parchment chart, with branching paths, symbols, markers. At the center was a glowing compass rose, and I realized it was lined up with my own heart. Every path I'd ever walked, every choice I'd ever made, it was all there. But so were all the other paths I could have taken. The ones I turned away from. The ones I never even saw. All leading, somehow, to the same general destination. She explained, gently, "There is no single right path. They all bring you back to the heart." And then she looked at me, eyes invisible, but presence undeniable. "But you must learn to use more than your mind. Your human brain is powerful, but it is not the only compass. You must also listen to your knowing, your intuition, your inner self." That moment cracked me open. I had spent decades living from the neck up. Logic, analysis, data. If it couldn't be proven, it wasn't real. But here I understood something I'd never even considered. Your head may guide you, but your heart, your deeper awareness, that's where truth begins. And then came the life review. I had never even heard that term before. Life review. It wasn't something I believed in or even knew to expect. But when it started, it felt Inevitable. Like the next logical step. Like turning the page in a book I forgot I was writing. We walked together, me and the woman, the guide, whatever she was, up a winding path in what looked like a mountain valley. It was quiet, but not empty. The wind moved with purpose. The trees hummed faintly, like the ground itself had a heartbeat. Eventually, we came to a small pond. Clear, still water. She didn't say much, just nodded toward the edge and said, "Kneel down. Touch the surface." So I did, and as soon as my fingers met the water, ripples began to spread, outward, slow, hypnotic, and within those ripples, I started to see moments. Tiny glowing pockets of memory, like floating bubbles on the water's surface. Each one shimmered, and when I focused on one, it expanded. And then I was in it. Not just watching, living it. I wasn't seeing a replay of my life on some screen. I was reliving it, feeling everything I felt at the time. But more than that, feeling what the other person felt too. That hit me hard. I went through dozens of moments, some small, some life-changing. Times when I'd helped someone, said something kind, lifted someone's spirit. And I could feel their relief, their joy, the shift in their energy as if it were my own. But the most powerful moments weren't the good ones. There was a memory from when I was a teenager, probably 17. My little sister and I were fighting, as usual. I was annoyed, tired, just wanted her to shut up. So I said something cruel. Not loud, not dramatic, just mean, just cold. At the time, I didn't think anything of it. She walked away. I moved on. But in the life review, I felt her pain. It hit me in the chest like a hammer. I could feel how much it hurt her, how she carried that moment with her quietly for years. And I just stood there, stunned, tears pouring down my face. That was the biggest teaching moment of my entire experience. It wasn't about guilt. No one was judging me. There was no punishment, just understanding, compassion. The point was to show me everything you do matters, every word, every action. It all creates a ripple. I was shown how a single kind gesture I made to a stranger led them to treat someone else more kindly later that day, and they passed it on to someone else. A chain reaction of energy. Every interaction creates impact, visible or invisible. The message was clear. Be aware of your presence. Be conscious of your energy. You're not just living a life. You're shaping the lives around you too. That was humbling and beautiful and overwhelming. And then something shifted. For the first time in that whole experience, I looked up and I saw clouds in the sky. Not storm clouds, just soft, slow, dreamy clouds. The kind you stare at as a kid, looking for animals and shapes. She and I just sat there for a while, watching them. No words, just peace. And then she stood up. "It's time," she said, and my heart sank. I hoped I was staying. I thought maybe I'd passed some kind of test, like I'd proven something and earned the right to remain. I even started thinking, ridiculously, maybe I can just run. Maybe if I run far enough, she won't catch me. But she just smiled. I didn't want to go. I got weepy, even angry. I begged her, "Please let me stay. Please don't send me back there." She came close, placed her hand on my broken shoulder, the one shattered in the crash. Then her other hand pressed gently over the ribs I'd cracked, right near the top of my sternum. It wasn't a healing gesture. It was a goodbye. And then I was gone. No flash, no tunnel. Just back. I came to in the hospital recovery room, screaming loud. "Where is she? Where is she? I don't want to be here. Let me go back." The nurse jumped back, terrified. I must have looked completely out of my mind. I remember grabbing at the air, begging them to send her back to me. They didn't know who I was talking about. A friend had been waiting for me outside. They brought her in, thinking maybe that would calm me down, but when I saw her, I just shook my head. That's not who I'm asking for. I wasn't being unkind. I just couldn't explain. How do you explain that you were somewhere else? That you met someone who wasn't a person? That you were ready to let go of life completely and then were thrown back in? Eventually, the anesthesiologist came in. He tried to calm me down. Said it was normal, just part of the meds, but I knew better. I remembered everything. That night, I didn't sleep. And the next morning, a hospital chaplain poked her head in. She asked if I was awake. I said, "Thank God you're here," out loud. The first time I'd used those words and actually meant them in years. She came in, sat by my bed, and I told her everything. To my shock, she didn't laugh. She didn't call me delusional. She just listened, nodded, and said, "You had a near-death experience." I didn't even know that was a term. I'd never read about it, never looked into it. But when she said it, something clicked. She said, "Now you have to ask yourself, what are you going to do with what you've learned?" About 2 weeks after I got home from the hospital, I made a decision. I wasn't going to pretend none of it happened. I couldn't. It would have been easier, sure. Go back to my old routines. Focus on my physical recovery. Push the whole thing into a dark corner of my mind. But it felt dishonest. Not just to myself, but to whatever that place was and the part of me that remembered it so clearly. So I decided I'd give this new path a real shot. That was terrifying, because, honestly, I had no clue what this new path even was. I was still working in science, analytical writing, mostly. I'd built my whole identity on logic, facts, peer-reviewed data. Now I had this massive spiritual experience burned into me like a second heartbeat, and I had no idea what to do with it. Worse, I was scared of what would happen if I shared it. Who would take me seriously after that? Would I lose job opportunities? Would people think I'd cracked? So, I started small. The first thing I did was go outside. Every day. I'd pick a quiet trail near my house, somewhere with trees or water, and just walk. Not with a podcast. Not with a plan. Just me and the silence. And most days, I'd find a place to sit and meditate. 10, 20 minutes. Nothing fancy. Just breathing, listening, watching how the light moved through the leaves. That helped more than I can explain. It anchored me, reconnected me, helped bridge the gap between that expansive, soul-level awareness I had in the other place and the clunky, chaotic reality of Earth. The second thing was deceptively simple. Gratitude. I know it sounds cliché, but it changed everything. Every morning, before I even got out of bed, I'd pause and give thanks. For anything. For waking up. For being able to breathe. For the sunlight through the window. For not being paralyzed. Just simple things. And I didn't just think the words. I felt them. That little ritual grounded me. It helped me reframe how I moved through the day. Noticing good things. Savoring little moments. Staying present, even when life got messy. I wasn't chasing a spiritual high. I wasn't trying to relive what happened in the operating room. I was just trying to bring some of that clarity into my daily life, to remember who I really was beneath the noise. And I was healing, faster than anyone expected. The doctors had told me I'd be in a body cast for 16 weeks, minimum. I was out in 4.5. That wasn't just physical. Something inside me was different. I wanted to heal. I wasn't afraid anymore. And that shift in energy, it sped things up. I stopped watching the news obsessively. Stopped getting caught up in drama or politics the way I used to. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood something deeper. The world is always going to spin. But peace is an inside job. That didn't mean I ignored suffering. Quite the opposite. But I didn't let it consume me. I stayed connected, but not entangled, concerned, but not crushed. And for the first time in my life, I stopped being afraid of death. That was huge, because for years, decades really, death had been my deepest fear. It showed up in subtle ways: hesitation, control, staying small. I avoided risks. I clung to what was safe, even when it made me miserable. But now I knew, not believed, but knew, that death wasn't the end. It wasn't even a bad thing. It was just a door, a transition. And once you've seen that with your own soul, everything changes. I used to live entirely from my head. Analysis, rationality, the smart choice. But after all this, I began living from something deeper. It wasn't about abandoning logic. It was about balancing it, adding heart, intuition, presence, that deep inner knowing that says, yes, this makes sense on paper. But does it feel right? Most of us were never taught how to listen to that voice. We were taught to ignore it, to dismiss it. But now I know. That voice is sacred. It's where the real answers live. And the more I honored it, the more aligned my life became. I started making different decisions, letting go of people who no longer resonated, saying no to work that drained me, saying yes to things that nourished me, even if they didn't make sense at the time. I was no longer chasing status or money or someone else's version of success. I was chasing peace, meaning, connection. One of the things that stuck with me the most was what my guide called this human journey, a near-life experience. I laughed when I first heard her say it, because it was perfect. Here we are, thinking we're living the real thing. But so often, we're half asleep, distracted, disconnected. We're near life, close, but not fully in it. And that's okay. That's part of the deal. Earth is messy. It's confusing. It's overwhelming. But we didn't come here for perfection. We came to learn, to stretch, to remember, and above all, to love. Not just the people we like, not just our family, but ourselves, our neighbors, strangers, even the parts of life that hurt. That's the real work. That's why we came. One of the hardest parts after I got home wasn't the physical recovery. It was trying to live in the same world as a completely different person. Because here's the thing. I didn't just go through a traumatic accident. I'd been cracked open, spiritually, emotionally, mentally. And when I came back, everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. And that was lonely. It felt like I had one foot in each world, one in this beautiful, sacred place I had visited, and the other in a society that just didn't know or didn't want to. People would say, "Wow, you're so lucky you survived." And I'd nod, smile politely. But I wanted to say, "You don't understand. I didn't just survive. I left, and I came back different." But I didn't, because how do you even start that conversation? For the first few weeks, I kept quiet. I didn't want to sound weird, or dramatic, or, God forbid, delusional. And honestly, I didn't think anyone would believe me. But that silence started to eat away at me. Because the experience hadn't just happened to me. It had transformed me, and trying to pretend it hadn't felt like lying. So slowly, gently, I started to talk. I started with the hospital chaplain. She'd already shown me kindness and understanding. When I opened up more about what I'd seen, what I'd felt, she didn't flinch. In fact, she said something that stuck with me. "You're not alone. More people have had these kinds of experiences than you realize, but most are too scared to speak." That gave me courage. I shared with a close friend next. She listened, eyes wide. Then she said, "I've never heard anything like this before, but I believe you." And that moment, That was everything. Because once someone believes you, it gets easier to believe yourself. After that, I couldn't go back to life as it was. I started looking at everything differently. Relationships, work, what I gave my time to, the things I used to tolerate. I couldn't anymore. Not because I was better than anyone else, but because I just didn't have time for things that didn't matter. You go to the other side and come back, and suddenly, time becomes precious. So I asked myself, who am I really? What do I want to spend the rest of my life doing? What brings me peace? What brings me joy? I realized I wanted to serve. Not in a religious way, but in a real, grounded, human way. To help people wake up, feel more, live with intention, to remind them, you are more than what the world told you. That wasn't some lofty mission. It was quiet, subtle, but deeply felt. So I started with what I knew. Writing. I began journaling every day. Not for content, not for anyone else. Just for me. To understand what I'd gone through. To explore what I now believed. And eventually, those pages turned into something more. Stories. Talks. Pieces I could share when I was ready. And people responded. With tears. With curiosity. With relief. Because deep down, so many of us are searching. We just don't always know how to ask the right questions. Not everyone was supportive. Some friends drifted away. Colleagues stopped calling. It hurt. But looking back, I get it. They didn't know how to process what I'd been through. And some people simply aren't ready for this kind of conversation. That's okay. I didn't come back to convince anyone. I came back to live fully. And sometimes living fully means shedding what no longer fits. That's not failure. That's evolution. Before the accident, I was always reaching. More goals, more success, more proof that I mattered. But now, I don't need to prove anything. I am, and that's enough. I don't chase meaning anymore. I create it. In conversations. In slowing down. In sitting with someone who's hurting. In choosing kindness over being right. That's what matters now. Not achievements, not image, not perfection. Presence, connection, integrity. Those are the new metrics of success. And oddly enough, ever since I stopped caring about conventional success, opportunities have flowed more freely than ever. One of the most powerful things my guide said to me was this: you came here to learn how to love, even when it's hard. Not romantic love, not just love for friends or family, but love for life itself, in all its mess, all its mystery. That's what Earth is, a classroom for the soul. It's dense, it's chaotic, it's heartbreak and beauty and noise. But we didn't come here to escape it. We came here to remember who we are within it, to bring light into the dark, to love the unlovable, forgive the unforgivable, stay soft in a world that tries to make us hard. That's the real work, and it's the most sacred thing we'll ever do. The real challenge wasn't surviving the accident. It was figuring out how to live afterward, with everything I now knew. Because I didn't just wake up with a broken body. I woke up with a new consciousness, and nothing in my life had prepared me for that. There's no manual for how to reintegrate after you've seen behind the veil. So, I made one for myself. Not a rule book, more like a rhythm. Every morning started with stillness. Before the emails, before the phone, before anything external, I gave myself space. Sometimes it was 10 minutes, sometimes a full hour, but the practice stayed the same. Presence first. I'd sit by the window with a blanket, close my eyes, and ask myself one question. What's true right now? Not what's urgent, not what's expected, just what's true. Sometimes the answer was as simple as, I feel tired, or I feel grateful. Other times, something deeper would rise, a memory, a whisper, a sense of direction. This wasn't about escaping life. It was about meeting it from the inside out. Just like we brush our teeth or shower, I realized we need spiritual hygiene too. So I began to treat inner alignment like maintenance. I journaled. I meditated. I went on solo walks. No podcast, no music, just me and the trees. I honored rituals, even if they were small. Lighting a candle, setting an intention, expressing gratitude before meals. This wasn't some new age performance. It wasn't aesthetic. It was survival. A way to stay sane, grounded, and connected in a world that felt louder every day. Because Earth didn't change after my experience. But I had. And I had to protect that shift. Not by withdrawing, but by staying centered within the chaos. I went back to writing a few months after the accident. Same field, same format. But I was different. The science was still there. My mind still worked the same. But now there was another layer. A constant awareness that life was more than data points. That behind every theory was a story. Behind every fact, a soul. I became less interested in being correct and more curious about being clear. More than once, I found myself editing someone's research report and quietly rewriting a sentence to feel more human. It wasn't just technical precision I cared about. It was resonance. I stopped trying to sound smart. I started trying to sound real. And the wildest part? It worked. Clients noticed. My work got deeper, stronger, more effective. Not because I was showing off, because I was finally showing up. Authenticity has a frequency. People feel it, even if they can't name it. I started attracting a different kind of person. People who were quietly waking up. They'd come to me under the guise of work or friendship, and then, over coffee or a long walk, the real questions would come out. Do you ever feel like something's missing? I had a dream I can't stop thinking about. What do you think it means? What do you believe happens when we die? And suddenly, we weren't talking about work anymore. We were talking about truth, about being human, about the invisible parts of us we so often ignore. Those conversations saved me. They reminded me that I wasn't alone, that others were waking up too, even if they didn't have language for it yet. And maybe that was part of my new job, not to convince anyone, not to preach, but simply to hold space, to normalize the mystical, to show that you can live a grounded, ordinary life while still carrying the extraordinary inside you. One of the biggest shifts was this. I no longer needed to prove what happened to me. For a while, I did. I wanted people to believe me. I thought if they didn't, maybe it wasn't real. But the truth is, reality doesn't need consensus. What I experienced, it changed how I love, how I live, how I see every soul I meet. And that's all the proof I need. I still don't have the right words for everything I saw. Some of it, I probably never will. But the feeling? That never left. It's here, in my bones, in the way I breathe, in how I walk into rooms now, with softness, with wonder, with reverence. And when people ask, how do you know it wasn't just a dream or a hallucination? I say, because I never woke up the same. We forget so easily that we're mortal. We think we'll get to the real living later, but later isn't promised. And this, right now, is not the dress rehearsal. This is the life. The one you said yes to, the one you showed up for. And maybe the point isn't to perfect it. Maybe it's just to be in it, fully, lovingly, awake, to remember what you are, not just a name, not just a job, not just a role, but a soul, a spark, a piece of something vast and wild and holy. And to live like that matters. After I came back, one of the strangest things was how deeply I could feel people, without them saying a word. It was like the filters were gone. The walls we all usually put up, I could see right through them. I'd walk into a room and sense who was anxious, who was grieving, who was holding something in. Not in a dramatic or supernatural way. It was subtle, gentle, but unmistakable. A sort of emotional frequency that each person carried. And now I was attuned to it. Before, I might have missed those signals entirely. I was too busy thinking, analyzing, being productive. But now, I noticed everything. A slight shift in someone's tone, a tightness around the eyes, the way someone's voice cracked when they said, "I'm fine." And with that awareness came something else, an overwhelming sense of compassion. Because I realized, most of us are walking around carrying invisible weight. Hurts we never speak aloud, fears we hide even from ourselves. And the irony is, we think we're alone in that. But we're not even close. What I learned on the other side is that we're far more interconnected than we know. Not metaphorically, energetically, like threads of light connecting every single one of us, whether we see it or not. And every word we speak, every action we take, sends a ripple through that web. I saw it firsthand in my life review, how one small act of kindness could cascade into something far greater. And now, back here, I couldn't ignore that truth. So I started living like it mattered. If I was at the grocery store and someone looked tired, I smiled. If a friend canceled plans last minute, I didn't take it personally. I asked if they were okay. If I sensed someone needed space, I gave it. Not to be perfect, just to be present. I wasn't trying to fix anyone. I just wanted to see them, because being seen, really seen, is one of the most healing things we can experience. I think a lot of us are starving for that. Not attention, not validation, but real presence. Someone who isn't trying to change us or rush us. Someone who's just there, heart open. That's what my guide was for me during the experience. She didn't lecture. She didn't diagnose. She just walked beside me, listened, and when it was time, gently showed me what I needed to see. I try to do that now, to be that quiet, grounded presence when people are ready to talk. And they do, often out of nowhere. Strangers will tell me things they've never told anyone. It happens in coffee shops, bookstores, walking trails. It's like their soul recognizes something in me, some shared knowing, and it all comes pouring out. I don't always have answers, and I've learned not to try to. Most of the time, people don't need answers. They just need space. Space to be honest. Space to fall apart. Space to wonder. I've come to believe that's one of the most sacred things we can offer each other. A safe space to be fully human. And when we do that, something beautiful happens. The masks come off. The stories soften. The light comes back into people's eyes. Not because we fixed them, but because they felt safe enough to return to themselves. That's the quiet power we all carry. And once you start living from that place, it's hard to go back. It's hard to pretend that small talk is enough, or that surface-level connection can nourish you. Because once you've touched that depth, even once, you hunger for it, you seek it, and slowly you start building a life that reflects it, a life where truth is welcome, where presence is honored, where love isn't a concept, it's a practice, a verb, a choice you make, moment by moment, not just for the people you like, but for everyone you meet, even when it's inconvenient, especially then, because that's when it counts. That's when it heals. That's when it changes everything. I didn't plan to tell anyone about what happened to me. Not at first. It felt too sacred, too raw. I thought, who would even believe this? I was a scientist, a rationalist. I had built an entire career on logic, data, and structure. Now here I was, haunted, in the best way, by something that couldn't be measured. And yet, the longer I kept it to myself, the heavier it became, like trying to hold light in a jar. It wasn't meant to stay contained. One day, a friend of mine noticed something had shifted. We were catching up over tea, and out of nowhere she said, "You seem different, softer, but also stronger. What happened to you?" I hesitated. My first instinct was to deflect, make a joke, change the subject. But something in me, something deeper, said, "Tell her." So I did, slowly, carefully, not to convince her, just to share. I told her about the surgery, the moment I felt love so overwhelming I thought I'd died. I told her about the meadow, the guide, the life review. I told her how I felt energy, how I saw the illusion of time, and when I finally stopped, I braced myself. I was waiting for the awkward pause, the skeptical look, the polite nod. But she just looked at me, eyes wide, and said, "I believe you." I remember blinking. "You do?" She nodded. "Not only do I believe you, I needed to hear that." That moment cracked something open in me. I realized this story didn't belong to me. It was for me, yes, but not just mine. It was meant to be shared, carefully, honestly, without ego. And so, I started sharing. First in small circles, then with colleagues, then at a retreat center that invited me to speak. Eventually, I was invited to record a talk. It was nothing flashy, just me sitting in a chair telling the truth. I figured a few dozen people might watch it, but then it was hundreds, then thousands, then more. Emails started coming in, messages from people I'd never met, thanking me for saying what they'd always felt, but never spoken. People who had their own near-death experiences. People who hadn't, but felt something shift just hearing about it. And that's when I understood. My story gave people permission to feel what they'd pushed down, to explore what they couldn't explain, to believe that maybe, just maybe, there's more to this life than what we see. I didn't become a guru. I didn't start a movement. I just kept sharing, quietly, steadily, from the heart. And I watched how it rippled, how it softened people, how it called them home to themselves. But I also learned something else, something harder. Not everyone was ready to hear it. Some people pulled away, some rolled their eyes, some questioned my sanity, my credibility. I had colleagues who stopped calling, extended family who avoided the subject altogether. And for a while, that hurt. But then I remembered what my guide told me. You already agreed to come back. This path was chosen, even if I couldn't remember choosing it. And not everyone is meant to walk it with me. That doesn't make them wrong. It just means we're at different places in our remembering. So I stopped needing everyone to understand. I stopped explaining. I just lived it, authentically, day by day, and the people who were meant to find me, they did. Sometimes in the most unexpected ways, like the woman I met at a bookshop who asked about the stone I was wearing, and 10 minutes later was crying in the aisle as she told me about the child she lost, or the man who sat next to me on a flight and ended up telling me he'd seen his mother's spirit the night she died. These moments aren't random. They're reminders. Glimpses of that invisible web that connects us all. And in those conversations, I see it again. The light in their eyes, the recognition. Like we've always known each other. Like we're just remembering what we forgot. That's the power of truth. Not just my truth. ours. Because in the end, I think we're all carrying pieces of a puzzle. Some of us have dreams. Some of us have visions. Some of us have a feeling we can't explain, but can't ignore. And when we speak it, when we stop hiding, we start to fit the pieces together. That's what I'm doing now, not preaching, just holding up my piece of the puzzle, hoping it helps someone find theirs. For most of my life, death was a dark specter at the edge of my thoughts. I treated it like a worst-case scenario, something to be analyzed, managed, avoided. I studied statistics. I memorized mortality tables. I kept my distance from anything that reminded me of my own fragility. But after that surgery, the true surgery of my soul, my relationship with death changed completely. It shifted from enemy to silent ally. I remember lying on my kitchen floor one morning, fully dressed, my body still patchy and bruised, and thinking, if I die right now, I'm okay with that. Not because I wanted to die. In fact, I was more alive than ever. But because the fear had evaporated. It felt like a heavy cloak had been removed. The thought of leaving my body no longer tightened my chest. It opened it. It made me appreciate every breath, every beat, every moment of this mysterious gift called life. I started treating death as a companion, a reminder that time is finite, that each second matters. When I brewed my morning coffee, I whispered a small thank you to the day for allowing me one more sip. When I walked outside, I felt the breeze on my face like a lover's caress. Even the mundane tasks, washing dishes, responding to emails, doing laundry, became sacraments. I ceased autopilot living. Every action, no matter how trivial, was an opportunity to honor the miracle of being here. One afternoon, I was chopping vegetables for dinner when a thought stopped me cold. This could be the last meal I ever cook. The realization wasn't morbid. It was liberating. I tasted the carrot slices as if they carried the essence of the universe. I felt gratitude so intense, it almost shook me. And in that gratitude lay a profound truth. Life isn't measured by years or achievements. It's measured by presence, how deeply you feel, how fully you're awake to what is. That's the gift death gave me. It taught me that time is not an enemy to conquer, but a sacred river to flow with. I began to mark my days not by calendars, but by moments of aliveness. A clear sunrise, a child's laugh, a friend's embrace, the hush of snow falling. These became milestones in my journey, far more meaningful than any title or paycheck. And when grief came, because it inevitably does, I no longer recoiled. I welcomed it. I let the tears flow without shame, knowing they were part of the same current that carried joy. I sat with friends who lost loved ones, not offering platitudes, but simply holding space for their sorrow and reminding them, gently, that love transcends the veil. Death may end a life, but it cannot extinguish the connections we forge. In my writing, I began to weave this new understanding into every line. Death wasn't something to hide or fear. It was a truth to embrace. I wrote essays about baking bread in the shadow of mortality. I recorded talks on the spiritual hygiene of dying well, how clarity about our end can teach us to live more generously. I spoke about rituals, lighting candles for ancestors, writing letters to those who've passed, creating small ceremonies to honor transitions. These practices grounded me and, I discovered, grounded others too. People reached out. They told me that talking about death made life sweeter, that instead of running from the thought of loss, they started hugging their spouses longer, telling their children they loved them more often, forgiving old hurts. They said, "You've given me permission to live." That's the paradox. By befriending death, we reclaim life. We break free from the illusion of endless time and wake up to the precious moment. We stop waiting for a someday and start loving the now. So, I offer you this truth, straight from my own journey. Don't wait for a brush with mortality to open your heart. Practice defying fear daily. Whisper gratitude into your coffee. Taste each bite as if it were your first and last. Tell people how you feel. Laugh loudly. Cry freely. Pause. Breathe. And when the thought of death drifts in, welcome it. Let it remind you that this life, your life, is a fleeting, golden wonder. Because once you've seen death as a friend, you'll never see life the same way again. Not long after I made peace with death, something unexpected began to happen. People started coming to me. Not just friends or family, complete strangers. They'd hear a podcast I was on, or read a small article I'd written, and they'd reach out. Quietly. Sometimes nervously. "I don't know why I'm telling you this," they'd say, "but I feel like you'll understand." And then the stories would pour out. Stories of near death, of grief, of awakenings that left them shaken. People who had felt things they couldn't explain, glimpsed places they couldn't describe, or simply sensed that this life was not all there is. Many of them had never told a soul before. They were afraid of being dismissed, labeled, misunderstood. I became a witness, a listener, a safe place to land. I never claimed to have answers, but I knew what it felt like to carry a truth that doesn't fit neatly into words or into society's tidy boxes. I knew the ache of returning to normal after touching something eternal. And I knew the loneliness that can come with seeing the world differently than you did before. So I just listened with my whole being, not with the aim to fix or interpret, but to hold. And often, that was all they needed, to be heard, seen, validated. And slowly, I began to understand something. This was part of my purpose. Maybe the most important part, to hold space for healing, not by doing, by being. That realization was both humbling and liberating, because I didn't need credentials or certifications to show up as my full self. My experience, my near death, my return, my remembrance, was the training. Life itself had shaped me into someone who could meet others where they were. No judgment, no agenda, just presence. Over time, I began leading small gatherings. I called them remembrance circles. We'd meet in quiet rooms, in nature, sometimes even online. We'd begin with silence, breath, grounding, and then, slowly, the stories would begin. People would share experiences they'd never dared speak aloud. Others would nod in recognition. The energy would shift. And again, we'd find ourselves enveloped in that same sacred atmosphere I'd felt during my NDE. That warmth, that peace, that sense of home. It wasn't me creating it. It was us. It was what happens when truth meets compassion, when vulnerability meets safety, when people stop pretending and start remembering, and healing, real healing, begins. Some people found closure in those circles. Some found courage. Others found clarity on their path. But most importantly, they found each other. They found proof that they weren't alone. You see, for so long, I'd thought I was the only one carrying this strange, luminous experience. But I was wrong. We are everywhere. People who have brushed the edge, who have cracked open, who have remembered, even if only for a moment, what we truly are beneath the noise. And once you remember, you don't forget. You might try. Life might distract you. Fear might pull you back into the shadows. But something inside stays lit. A pilot light that never quite goes out. And if you nurture it, gently, patiently, it becomes a fire that warms not only you, but everyone you meet. That's what I try to live now. Not a big, flashy mission, just a quiet, consistent way of being, rooted, present, loving. Of course, I still have human moments. I get overwhelmed. I forget. I stumble. But even in those moments, I try to ask myself, what would the version of me who stood on that other side say right now? And the answer is always the same. Breathe. Slow down. Be kind. Not just to others, but to yourself. Because you matter. Your energy matters. The way you walk through the world matters. Whether you speak 1,000 words or say nothing at all, your presence is felt. So choose it with care. Choose it with love. I believe that's what we're all being called to now. Not to be perfect, but to be real. To remember who we are and live from that remembering, even when it's hard. Even when the world doesn't understand. Even when we feel small. Because truth doesn't need volume to echo. It only needs to be lived. You know, for most of my life, I believed that science and spirituality couldn't coexist. In my mind, they were like oil and water, forever separate. Science was order, reason, data. Spirituality was vague, emotional, unprovable, and I wanted answers, repeatable ones, quantifiable ones. So I built my whole identity around being a rational thinker, a geologist, a writer. Someone who could explain sediment layers, carbon cycles, tectonic shifts, solid stuff. But after my near-death experience, that wall I'd built between science and spirit, it didn't just crack. It crumbled. At first, I didn't know what to do with that. I felt like I was living in two worlds. In one, I was still a trained scientist with degrees and professional experience. In the other, I had seen things, felt things, that defied every rule I used to live by. I tried to compartmentalize them, tried to keep the experiences over there, as if they wouldn't bleed into the rest of my life. But they did. I'd sit down to write something technical, and suddenly I'd see the energy behind the facts. The way rivers moved felt like veins. The way trees grew felt like intention. I started noticing patterns, not just in the rocks or soil, but in people, in relationships, in time. I saw the same cycles in a river delta as I did in human behavior. Erosion mirrored grief. Pressure mirrored transformation. It was like nature had been trying to whisper to me all along. And now I could finally hear it. I began reading differently. Not just peer-reviewed journals, but ancient texts, near-death accounts, indigenous wisdom. I found physicists talking about quantum entanglement and consciousness fields. I found neuroscientists exploring awareness beyond the brain, and suddenly, this strange little thread began to weave it all together. We're not either or. We're both. We are atoms and energy, biology and spirit, logic and intuition, data and knowing. And the more I allowed myself to integrate that, the more alive I felt. I remember one day, I was hiking in the foothills near my home. It was early spring, and patches of snow still clung to the shadows. I stopped to rest on a rock, just catching my breath when a hawk soared overhead, and something clicked. I saw in that one moment the whole equation: motion, thermals, muscle memory, instinct, but also grace. The unspoken intelligence in that flight. The elegance that couldn't be measured, only felt. It was like nature whispered, "See? It's always been both." That moment broke me wide open. I laughed and cried at the same time, not because it was some huge revelation, but because I finally gave myself permission to let these worlds touch, to let the analytical part of me meet the mystical part without judgment. And that changed everything. I started bringing this integrated perspective into my work, in conversations, in my writing, not in a preachy or overly mystical way, just honestly. I would say, yes, here's what we know from a geological standpoint, but isn't it fascinating that indigenous traditions have echoed this knowledge for centuries? Or I'd write something like, when we examine water memory from both a molecular and spiritual lens, what does that tell us about the intelligence of the universe? People responded, not always with agreement, but with curiosity. Because deep down, I think most of us are tired of being told we have to pick a side, that we have to be either logical or spiritual. I think what many of us are craving is wholeness, a worldview that doesn't force us to cut off parts of ourselves in order to be taken seriously. And here's the funny part. Once I stopped fighting it, my science deepened. I became a better observer, a better thinker, because I was finally using all of my awareness, not just the parts that were deemed acceptable in a lab. Intuition started playing a role. I'd feel drawn to explore certain topics, or I'd just know there was something important in a certain research paper before I even opened it. I began trusting those nudges, not blindly, but with the same kind of curiosity I used to bring to fieldwork. It wasn't magic. It was alignment. And I began to understand that science, at its core, is really just the study of patterns, and so is spirituality. Both are ways of asking, what is this? Why are we here? How does it all connect? The only real difference is language. So I stopped translating myself, stopped editing out the parts of me that didn't fit neatly into one box or the other. And the result? I became more real, more grounded, more useful even. When people came to me for guidance, I didn't just offer logic or love, I offered both. I could say, here's what's happening chemically in your body when you're anxious, and here's how breath and prayer can help you regulate that. I could point to neural pathways and soul paths in the same sentence, and it felt true. This isn't about proving anything. It's not about winning debates. It's about living more fully. It's about healing. And if healing requires science and spirit to shake hands, then let's stop pretending they're enemies. They never were. For a long time after the accident, I kept everything to myself. Not because I was ashamed, but because I was scared. Scared that people would think I'd lost my mind, that I'd be labeled the woo-woo lady or dismissed entirely. I'd built a life around logic, science, and proof, and now, here I was, carrying something unprovable, indescribable, and utterly sacred. But it kept pressing on me. This quiet but constant nudge. Speak. The first time I shared my story publicly, it wasn't planned. I was at a retreat, not as a teacher, just a participant. We were going around in a circle, doing introductions. Simple stuff. Name, where you're from, what brought you there. When it got to me, I opened my mouth to say something safe, something neutral. But instead, the truth came out. I told them about the surgery, the accident, the moment I woke up on that other side, the warmth, the woman, the meadow, all of it. I could feel my voice shaking, my palms sweating. I kept thinking, what are you doing? Stop talking. But I couldn't. And when I finished, there was this long silence. For a second, I was sure they were going to smile politely and move on. But then someone across the circle, an older woman, spoke up. She said, I've never told anyone this before, but something very similar happened to me when I gave birth to my first child. And just like that, it broke open. One by one, people started sharing. Not always NDEs, but moments of mystery, visions, dreams, feelings they'd buried for years. That one story, my story, gave them permission to speak their truth too. That's when I realized This isn't about me. It never was. My story was just the door. The thing people needed to hear so they could walk through their own. After that, things began to unfold almost on their own. A friend asked me to share my experience on a small podcast she ran. I said yes, even though I was terrified. We recorded it on a rainy afternoon. Nothing fancy, just me, her, and a cheap mic. But somehow, that episode found people. It started getting shared. Emails started rolling in, some from people I knew, most from people I'd never met. I thought I was the only one. This helped me make sense of something that's haunted me for years. I cried all the way through it. I couldn't believe the response. One message I'll never forget came from a man in his late 60s. He said, "I've kept a secret for 40 years. I died in a car crash when I was 26. They revived me. I never told a soul what I saw. Until now." He ended the message with, "Thank you for letting me remember." That's when I knew I had a responsibility, not to convince anyone, but to hold the light, to make space for others to remember too. So I started speaking more. Carefully, thoughtfully, sometimes in interviews, sometimes in writing. Eventually I gave my first talk, standing on a small stage, heart racing, hands cold. I told my story, not with polish or perfection, but with honesty, vulnerability. I told it the way it lived inside me. Afterward, a man came up to me. He looked tough, tattoos, calloused hands, military posture, but his eyes were red. He said, "You gave words to something I haven't been able to say for 20 years. And then he hugged me, tight. I went home and cried, not because I was overwhelmed, but because I finally understood what my experience was for. It wasn't just to wake me up. It was to help wake others up too, not to preach, not to convert, but to remind, gently, kindly, that we are so much more than what we see, that death is not the end, that love is real, even when we can't measure it, that our lives, even the painful parts, have meaning. And once I accepted that, I stopped worrying about being misunderstood. I stopped trying to fit into the mold of who I used to be. Because the truth is, I'm not that person anymore. And I don't want to be. Now, when I speak from that deeper place. The one I saw in that meadow. The one that whispered, "Welcome home." Because that's the real point of all of this, isn't it? To come home to ourselves, to remember who we are, and to live from that remembering, no matter how scary, uncertain, or vulnerable it might feel. You'd think after an experience like mine, after dying and coming back, you'd walk through life with a kind of permanent glow, right? Like everything becomes easy, peaceful, transcendent. But no. You come back and find the trash still needs to be taken out. Your email inbox is overflowing. The dog throws up in the hallway. The Wi-Fi goes down. Life continues. Messy, beautiful, mundane. And that, honestly, is where the real work began for me. It's one thing to feel unconditional love when you're in a realm of pure light and peace. It's another thing entirely when you're stuck in traffic or standing in line behind someone yelling at a cashier. That's where the practice starts, not on a mountaintop, but at the kitchen sink. After the accident, when I was home healing, I had a lot of quiet time. Time to reflect, yes, but also time to live in this changed state. And I realized something early on. If I didn't intentionally integrate that otherworldly experience into this very worldly life, it would fade, like a dream after waking. It would slip through my fingers. So I made a choice. I would live as if everything mattered. I started simple. Every morning, before I even opened my eyes, I'd say thank you. Not with my voice, just silently to myself. I'd thank my body for being alive, even if it was sore. I'd thank the day for giving me another chance. And I'd thank the me who came back, who said yes to this body and this world again. Then I'd take a breath, a real one, deep and slow. And I'd remind myself, I'm still here. So there's still something I'm meant to do. Over time, I began noticing things. The way sunlight looked when it hit my kitchen table. How a single bird could silence a whole morning with its call. How someone's face changed when I really, truly listened to them. Life became layered, like there was something humming underneath everything I'd ignored before. One of the biggest changes was how I handled people. Before, I could be impatient, judgy even. If someone wasn't getting it, I'd write them off in my mind. But now, I saw their pain. I felt it, not always clearly, but enough to shift how I treated them. I'd look at a stranger and think, you forgot who you are too, didn't you? And that softened me. I didn't become perfect, far from it, but I became present. And that's everything. You see, when I was on the other side, the message I kept receiving was, live a life worth living. And not in the make $1 million or become famous kind of way. No, a life worth living meant a life where you're awake, where you're kind, where you listen when it's inconvenient and love when it's hard, where you let people in, where you show up. So that's what I've been trying to do. I meditate, I write, I walk. I sit under trees a lot more than I used to. I try to listen, not just to people, but to life itself, to the rhythm that's always been here. And some days I forget. Some days I get angry, or I spiral, or I close off again. But the difference is, I notice, and I come back quicker. That's all it really is. Remembering, over and over again. One of the most powerful lessons from that other side was that there is no wasted moment. None. Even the hardest things, maybe especially the hardest things, are full of meaning. They're invitations to grow, to soften, to deepen. When you start living that way, everything changes. You forgive faster. You laugh easier. You stop holding on to grudges like they're some kind of safety net. You realize they're just bricks you've been dragging around, and you let them go. Not because you're some enlightened being, but because it just feels lighter that way. I've also started sharing more with the people closest to me, not preaching, just being honest, telling them what I felt, what I saw, how it changed me. And most of them? They listened. Not all of them understood, but they heard me. And that's enough. If there's one thing I've truly learned, it's this. We're all carrying something sacred. Every one of us. But most of us have forgotten. My job now, my joy now, is to live in a way that helps others remember. Not through big declarations, but through presence, through eye contact, through showing up when it matters, through love, because love is the thread. It's what I felt on the other side, and it's what I try to offer now, in every moment I can. And when I fall short, I forgive myself, and I try again. One thing I never expected after all this was how many people would come to me with questions about death. Not religion, not angels, just death. The raw, terrifying idea of not existing. It used to scare me too. Terrify me, in fact. Before my accident, just the thought of dying would send my mind into a spiral. Blackness, nothingness, or worse, eternal punishment. I didn't believe in any afterlife, but I was still afraid of what might come. But now, that fear is gone, completely. And that freedom, that peace, it's something I wish I could hand to everyone I meet. So when people come to me and say, I'm terrified of dying, I don't try to fix it. I don't start with a lecture or a story. I just listen. Because usually the fear isn't really about death. It's about unlived life. It's about regret, about feeling like you haven't been seen or loved or known. It's about feeling like you've wasted time. That maybe you never found your niche. That maybe you didn't matter. And I get that. I really, really do. That's why I started working one-on-one with people, quietly at first. No business cards, no website, just word of mouth. A friend of a friend who lost someone, a mother whose child was sick, a man who couldn't sleep because of a terminal diagnosis. They didn't need therapy. They needed someone who'd been to the edge and come back with a different story. I remember one woman in particular. Her name was Lien, mid-40s. She'd just lost her husband in a biking accident, just like mine, actually. She came into my living room with red eyes, holding a sweater of his she refused to wash. She said, I can't breathe without him, and I'm afraid I'll never see him again. I didn't have a script for that, so I sat beside her, and I told her what I'd seen. That moment of waking up in the meadow, that feeling of still being me, but more. That knowing he wasn't gone. Not really, just somewhere else. She asked me, but how do you know? And I said, because I was there. She cried, I cried, and then she asked if she could come back and talk again. So she did. Every Tuesday afternoon for weeks. We didn't talk about theology or doctrine. We talked about love, about connection, about energy and memory, and how he kept showing up in her dreams. Slowly, she began to smile again. Not often, but it came. That's when I realized, I'm not here to convince anyone. I'm here to hold space, to make the idea of death less sharp, less final. To soften the fear until what's left is something you can walk with, not run from. I started speaking to small groups after that. Hospices, spiritual centers, sometimes even college classes on consciousness or psychology. I'd talk about the near-death experience, yes, but more than that, I'd talk about what came after. Because it's not the flash of light or floating above your body that changes you. It's what you do once you're back. And what I've done, what I keep doing, is reminding people that death isn't the end of the story. It's a chapter break, a shift in form. Energy doesn't vanish. It transforms. When people ask me, will I still be me? My answer is always the same. Yes, not the you that needs a job title or a passport or a favorite TV show, but the real you, the one underneath all of that. That essence, that light, it doesn't go anywhere. I've felt it. I've been it. And that's what I try to pass on. Not as doctrine, but as possibility, as hope. When I sit with people who are dying, I don't give them grand speeches. I hold their hand. I look into their eyes. And sometimes I just say, you're going home. And the way their face softens, it tells me they know exactly what I mean. It's not always peaceful. Sometimes there's pain, struggle, resistance. That's human. But over and over again, I've seen how one conversation, one story, one flicker of light can shift everything. Death stops being the enemy. It becomes the doorway. And for those left behind, the ones who stay, it gives them something to hold on to, a thread of meaning in the grief, a sense that maybe, just maybe, their love didn't disappear into nothingness. I'm not trying to be anyone's guru. I don't have all the answers, but I do know one thing. We're more than these bodies, and death is not the opposite of life. It's the doorway back to where we came from. People often ask me, if it was so peaceful, So full of love. Why did you come back? And honestly, I didn't want to. I really didn't. When she told me it was time, I cried. I tried to stay. I looked for a way to run, to escape the return. That place, whatever you want to call it, was everything I had been looking for my whole life. It was home. It was truth. It was where the noise stopped and only love remained. But even as I resisted, something deeper than words unfolded inside me. I didn't come back because I had to. I came back because I had already agreed to. I just didn't remember. Not until she showed me. The plan I made before I was born. The choice I made to come into this life. To experience the physical world with all its chaos and confusion. Not as punishment, but as purpose. And the moment I saw that, saw myself choosing this life, I understood. It was never about escaping pain. It was about remembering love within it. I didn't come back to become someone new. I came back to remember who I had always been, and to help others remember too. Not by preaching, not by saving, just by being, just by living fully, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. I've realized since then that we're not here to be perfect. We're not here to collect achievements or prove our worth. We're here to feel, to break and heal, to lose and love, to grow and fall and stand up again. We're here to learn how to love ourselves through all of it. And when people come to me now, trembling with fear of death or paralyzed by the question of meaning, I don't give them answers. I sit with them. I remind them gently, you are more than your story. You are more than your pain. And death is not the end. It's just the closing of one chapter before the next begins. I live differently now, not dramatically, just more slowly, more aware. I take walks in the woods without my phone. I pause to listen to the wind. I speak more kindly to myself, even on hard days, and every single morning before my feet hit the floor. I whisper, thank you for this breath, for this chance, for this wild, imperfect life. I don't fear death anymore, not even a little. What I fear, if anything, is forgetting again. Forgetting the love that's at the root of all things. Forgetting that every person I meet is carrying a soul story of their own. Forgetting that heaven isn't a destination. It's a memory buried deep inside each of us, waiting to be felt. Even here, especially here. That's why I came back. Not because I had to, but because I chose to. Because someone, somewhere, needed to hear this story and remember their own. And if I can be that mirror, even just once, if one heart softens, if one soul lets go of fear, then every broken bone, every scar, every breath since waking up was worth it. I'm not afraid anymore, and neither should you be. You are loved. You are held. You are never alone. Welcome home.